Hello everybody, welcome to VFX 02. Let me know, Robert, how you going? Let me know if there's any audio issues this morning. Last week I hadn't came for the heckling, stayed for the VFX. Let me know if there's any echo issues this morning, because last week I had some bad issues, but hopefully I've sorted it out. Good. Oh, cool. Excellent. Well, welcome. We're going to be continuing on this week with our VFX shot, our Kong shot. And last week, if you remember, we made some drool in vellum and a little bit of flip. I didn't do anything this week on that stuff. I've just left it as is. And I'll probably get back to that in another stream, maybe to render out the flip. But this week, I thought what I might do if I switch over to Houdini. What I might do here is now work on, last week I mentioned about adding leaves to the scene. So, or something to sell the effect of breath from Kong. So we've got our drool, we've got our vellum drool and our ridiculous flip drool, which is a little bit over the top. But we have this sense of force, and you can see on the actual plate, if I turn off these things so I can scrub, you can see that there's a bit of wind being suggested on the dress of the girl. So I want to suggest that in the environment as well. And the way that we can do that is by adding some like breath effects. Now, breath isn't usually visible. We have the drool that sells that. But we can add a little bit of pyro sort of stuff coming out of here. And mainly what we can sell it with is dust and maybe some leaves, things like that sitting on the ground that get kicked up and disturbed. So I may as well just jump in and get going. So we've got our foreground asset. So that's where we're going to probably scatter a bunch of things that we can kick up. But let's first set up a pyro sim for what's going to be driving our leaves and dirt and dust. So we'll go to our Kong asset. Actually, let's go to our drool, because this kind of has everything that we need in terms of our starting point. So we've got our Kong asset here, and again we want to use the mouth as the driving sort of area that we're going to be doing this. So let me turn off materials. There we go. So I might actually take the whole, this part here. So what I'm going to do is copy these blasts and object merge. I'm going to jump in to a new geometry node, and I'm going to call this one pyro breath, something like that. I don't know if there's an E on the end, doesn't matter. And then I'll probably, for the pyro source, I'm going to isolate just kind of the back of the mouth here. Something like that. Got a few people joining in. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Let me know if you have any questions as well. Okay, so we've got our mouth, and that's great. And it's also facing forward, which is handy. Sometimes, when you have geometry, it's sort of facing all directions. But with this, it's already sort of facing in this way that we want the sim to go. So that's kind of good. So if I put a facet down and... Hey Reed, how's it going? If I put a facet down and look at the normals, they're pointing in the direction that we want. Maybe, maybe we want a little more this direction, but if we look at the mouth, it's kind of going to be going out this way. So that's good. We can use those normals for velocities. Now, what else can we do? We can, if we're going to turn this into a pyro source, the easiest way to do that is just to scatter points on this geometry. You can see that those points inherit the normals, which is great. Let me just hide that. There we go. So there's our points. And we can, in an attribute wrangle, just create a density attribute. So at density equals 1. Hey Patrick, how's it going? So at density equals 1, not doing any variation or anything, and really we don't need it for this simple sim. And then we can, also what I'm going to do is turn the normals into velocity. So I'll say v at v equals v at n, and that's just going to copy those normal vectors into the v attribute. And we can create a marker for that as well. Just, it's always handy to have a marker for velocity. So there we go. And you can see it's the same. It's displayed a little bit longer than the normal one, but it's the same. Same values, same direction. That's all we care about. Then we can turn this into a volume by volume rasterize attributes. And that will convert any point with an attribute on it into a volume. So we've got our density we can put in there. Wow, there we go. Huge. And we've got our V that we can add in there as well. Now, it takes p-scale as an attribute to control the size of this, or you can control the size of it like that. I'm just going to do this because I don't really need any variation to the p-scale or anything, so I'm just going to do it using that. And that is the most basic way to create a pyro source. So now we've got something where velocity is going to be pushing the pyro this way, and we've got some density. Let's just start building a pyro sim and see what we get. We may need to modify this source a little bit, but it might be fine. Let's have a look at our action again to determine the starting point. So probably maybe around 240 or earlier. He's probably going to be, he's sucking in his breath and then blows out. So let's just go, I don't know, 238. And we'll jump in. So pyro sim, we need pyro solver. We need a smoke object. And we need a volume source. So the smoke object is where we define the bounds. The volume source is where we bring in the source we just created. So let's create a null and just call that out smoke. Sorry about my overly noisy keyboard as well. I wish it was quieter, but it is this very old Silicon Graphics keyboard that I love. It feels like you're typing on an old library from the a library computer from the 80s or something. But it is really satisfying to use, but it's incredibly noisy for streaming. All right, so first context, now I'll do SOP and use the null out smoke. And source volume is density, and we have density in pyro sim as well, so we'll just do density and density. Operation is add, the field rank is scalar. Then we'll also add V, but the target field is different. So V is the field that we created. If we have a look here, and yeah, I am aware that the keyboard is noisy. So we can see here we've got a field called V because the volume rasterize just takes whatever attribute name and converts it to a field. So you can see it's V and it's a vector 3 field because it's a velocity. It has X, Y, and Z information. But we need to target it to the vel field because V does not exist in the pyro world. It's vel. So we need to say V goes into vel. And operation can be add as well, that's fine. And now we need to set our bounds. So let's take, what do we have? What can we use for our bounds? Let's bring in the foreground asset, I think. So create a null here. And say out foreground. And then I'm going to bring that into my pyro here. And foreground there. So we can use this for our bounds. So we've got our Kong asset here, and we've got our foreground, and I'll merge them together to create our bounds. So like that, bound. Might be a little large, but that's kind of okay. So there we go. Let's have a look through the camera. It's giving us quite a bit more than what we need, so I might just cull some of this foreground element here, probably because our camera, is yeah. Let's do this. So I'll just select. Oops, need to unpack. Oh, convert this. It's a poly soup, so I'm going to put down a convert node because this came from Maya. and because of the way I'm bringing it in, I think, I'm loading it in through an Alembic. So when you unpack it, it turns into polysoups, which are an efficient way of storing lots of polygons, but you can't select individual polygons. Actually, maybe I'll just select this piece here like that, blast it away, and isolate it. Now our bound should be a little smaller. There we go. And we can always increase it through here. We can increase padding on particular axes. So that can be our bound. Let's do null, out, max, bound. And then for our minimum bounds, so this is going to be the maximum area that our smoke can go. And then our minimum bounds, what I'm going to do is take this isolated piece of the mouth and go to my start frame, which is 238. So I'll put a time shift on 238. And then bound that. And now I've got a little box around my source, so I can pad that a little bit. It's always good to not have it super tight, especially when you've got really fast moving sources. You want a little bit of room so it allows for that velocity field to really push out very quickly. So let's call that out initial bound, and then in the smoke object we're going to reference that here. So this is always fun typing this out. bbox ... out, oops, out initial bound, and then d_x size, and that gives us the x size of that initial bound. Then we just copy that and paste it in y and change it to y size, and then z size. And then we need to do the position, because the position at the moment is still 0. So we need to use the centroid expression to grab the centroid of that box as well. So ... out bounds. And then it's d_x. And it does tell you what it's expecting here in the tooltip, dx, dy, dz. So that's how you know if you forget. d_x. And then again, copy, paste. Bunch of times. When I was working at Method and doing this stuff a lot, what I did was actually I created an object path down here where I could just put an object in, similar to on the gas resize fluid dynamic, where you put in your max bounds. So to bring in that maximum bounds, I can put from object, and I can just pick the max bounds here, like this, or I can do it like this as well, ... out max bound. So that's really easy. So what I did is I took this idea of having an object path here, put it just below here, and had all these expressions reference that. So that instead of having to type that out every time, you can just pick your object and these just dynamically update. That is so much easier. It took a little bit of fiddling to get that working, but it is probably something that I will do again now that I'm working at home. So, okay, so we've added our max bounds as well. So we start off with this small box, but this is the maximum area that the sim can go. Let's go to our pyrosolver and turn off combustion, because we're not doing fire. And I'm going to turn down my dissipation, because by default, 0.1 is really, really, really high. Okay, so let's just play and see if we get something. Ah, no. Okay, so next thing we need to do, gas resize fluid dynamic, delay frames. Because of where the gas resize fluid dynamic lies in the chain of how the pyrosolver is solved, so it's solved from left to right, the resize is in the pre-solve step, and the source is in the post-solve step. So the resize actually kicks in before the sourcing happens. So what you tend to get when this is set to 0 is that it resizes first before the source, and then there's nothing. So it goes to world 0, and then you get no source. That's why this delay frames is here, so that you can give it some time to actually allow the source to bring in some density, and then, so there you go. If I get out a wireframe, now you can see it's allowing it to actually source that. And if I hit play, we can see that we're getting something. It's very slow moving. So our velocity is obviously very low. Let's crank it up here. So I'm going to do v at v equals v at n times 10. There we go. We can see that in there. Let's see what effect that has. not much. So it's going out, but it's very slow. We can also crank it up here. So, we can put that up to 5. And that will crank it up. You can see the resizing is pretty tight as well. So I'm going to add some padding. So I'm going to add, I'm just going to put the overall padding to 1. See how that helps. And another thing we can do, velocities are weird. Yeah, they are. I'm going to do something in a second, which hopefully will make this a little better. On the gas resize though, you can see that this is kind of, it's clipping very weirdly. That might be because of my max bound. Let's just check that. I might need to, yeah, look, our max bound is actually below where our, and actually not even inside of our initial bound. So we need to make this way bigger. And in fact, I need to time shift this, I think. And let's just go 1, 1, 1, 1. That might work a little better. Let's try that. So yeah, one thing with density, when you're dealing with kind of low densities, you have this field cutoff here. So what that does is it decides when to cut off the resizer. So it will sort of resize if the densities are super low, super duper low. It might sort of resize and chop them off. And sometimes you'll see, it's quite common to see in a lot of people's sims, is that the edges of the smoke will start eroding in blocks when the resizer kicks in. It goes as it's fading out. That is because the density is below this field cutoff. So if you want the resizer to not do that stuff with your really low densities, you need to just increase the zeros so that it doesn't end up chopping off any low velocity or low densities as it's pumping out. Okay, so now at least it's sort of shooting out in the direction, but it's not very quick still. But that's, yeah, it's getting there. It's getting a little better. One thing that you can do with velocities, especially when we're just dealing with a source like this that doesn't have nothing coming out of it, is I actually split my source into 2 volume rasterize attributes. Because if you have a look at this, especially when you go into higher resolutions, like if I take the voxel size down and the particle size down, so I have a really thin source if I want something really detailed, the velocity field is really thin, so it's just here as well, the same as the density. So it doesn't really have a lot of velocities in there to carry it forwards. It just sort of has a little bit of velocity here, pushes it forward, and then it's out of that velocity field. So it sort of loses its momentum very quickly. So you need to crank it up very high, but it doesn't really work that well. So what I tend to do is I will volume rasterize density and have that however I want at the right size, if I want it to be nice and thin or fat, whatever I want it to be. And then on the other side here, I will rasterize V. But I will do that at a different scale, maybe a much larger particle scale. And we can visualize that by doing a volume, volume trail. I always forget that one. Volume trail. So velocity volume's going there, and then points to trail going here. So what we can do is take the bound, our initial bound that we created, and do a points from volume. Fill it with points that we can use for this visualizer. And then we can plug that in to the first input. And now we can see those velocities. So if I take my particle scale down, you can see, when I take it right down to kind of what I had over here, it's very small. But if I crank it up, it's a much larger velocity field. And then I can so this is just for visualization purposes. And then I'll just merge those two together. We don't need to do a volume merge because we're not combining the fields together. We're just bringing them back so that they're together again instead of being separate. So let's have a look at the effect that has on the push from the source. I don't know, it's kind of, yeah, I think it's better. I think it seems to be pushing it out a lot more because what you can see is that it's actually pushing now for this whole section here rather than just a little bit back here. It's got a lot more push. And it's the same thing when I create velocity fields for geometry. When I want like a character to be affecting a simulation, I will make the velocities much larger than just the surface so that it actually really pushes stuff around. Alright, so the next thing we need to bring in, so that we can see how this is reacting to the environment, is to bring in the collision of the ground. And the way that this has been modeled is not the best for effects, but hopefully we can just cap these. That might be fine. So we'll have a look at this one here that we isolated. Let's just put a polycap on that. Hopefully that'll work. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So I'm just going to go out here and create a null. And I'm going to create a few things first. So facet. It's always a good idea to have normals, just in case we don't. I'll put a facet down, and then I'll also put a trail down. Now, this thing isn't moving, but it does help for collision objects to have a velocity, even if it's 0. Now, I could do that in a wrangle as well. I could say v equals 0, but trail, it's nice and easy. So when a object that has velocity hits something with velocity of 0, it slows down because it takes some of that velocity and imparts it onto the object. So you get a nicer kind of interaction with your static colliders. There is something like that happening inside the simulation as well, but it doesn't seem to be quite as effective as actually setting it on the attribute. So let's now put a null down, and I'm going to say out static geo, and then same as what we did previously for colliders, we need to do a VDB from polygons. And you can copy this whole setup from your previous one if you had set it up in another solver. It's very similar to how we would deal with flip or any other kind of collision. So we create a VDB, and then we put down another null and say out static VDB. And jump back into the simulation. Create a static object this time and merge it in underneath the pyro solver, and make sure you get the order right, so it's left effects right. So you need to make sure that the static object is on the left. And then swap path will be out static geo. It's not deforming, so we don't need to tick that on. If you tick that on, it cooks this every frame, so it's quite slow. So you only do it if it is genuinely deforming geometry. And then our RBD solver collision type, volume, mode, volume sample, and then we pick the proxy volume. So // out static VDB. Okay, so let's just check that there, make sure that looks okay. And looks like it's baked into the viewport, which is always great. Seems to happen with VDBs sometimes. Let's go back out here. Might need to create a new viewport. Control T. There we go. Alright, so now we can see our collision guide. So always, Control T if your viewport sort of degrades like that and some geometry gets stuck in there. You can just, when you're in your viewport, just hit Control T and it will spawn a new one. So there's our collision guide. That looks okay. Let's just turn that off and then hit play. And we can see what happens when it hits the geometry. And there we go. And let's just check. The other thing with collisions, and I think I mentioned this with flip as well, is that you should check the collision guide to make sure that that is actually displaying something. So you can see it there. So that's good. Yeah, that's pretty good representation of the collision. So there's our density. You can also turn on velocity as well, and sometimes that's a good way to check what's happening with the collisions. If you can see, you can kind of see when that hits the collision there. So that's another good way to check to make sure that the collisions are sort of doing their thing. Alright, so through the camera, let's see what that looks like. Wow, look at that. Crazy. But the thing to note is that I'm not going to use this for rendering. Probably. I don't think so. So it can kind of look like whatever. I'm only really interested in the velocities at this point. I don't have the geo for the girl and the pole, which could be useful, but that's okay. For now, this is kind of, yeah, it's a little bit over the top. could be nice if I turned it into fire and he was breathing fire. Which, incidentally, if you're interested, we don't have temperature, so that would kind of really help in terms of shading this as fire. But the cool thing about Pyro is that you can kind of just, you know, take your fields and make them look like anything. So I may be able to make this look a little bit like fire. So let's just get rid of rest fields. We don't have those. We don't have temperature. We don't have heat. We don't have fuel. We don't have CD. Fire breathing Kung. That's right. That's right. I'm gonna do it. Volume visualization. Let's see. It might be difficult with just density, but so in the emission field, you can put density. You can put whatever you like. It's just kind of, you know, a field. Put density in the color as well. One thing you'll notice is that we don't get anything showing up, even though I crank my emission. If you don't have smoke, the emission won't show up. So I can even turn the smoke to 0, but if you don't have anything in here, it doesn't display. And sometimes that can be the same for shaders as well. So something you need to be aware of when you have a sim that just has one field, or if you do a sim without density, sometimes the fire doesn't display. So you need to just pipe in a field, whatever field you have, into the density channel to make it come on. All right, well there you go. You know, you can do that, and so you can play with the ranges to make it feel a bit more fiery. It's obviously a super low res simulation, so there's not going to be a ton of detail in here. But there you go, fire breathing Kong, something you probably never seen before. I don't think there's ever been a fire breathing Kong before. Maybe the next movie that comes out. Alright, so this is cool. This is all we need. I don't know why it's displaying like this. I think it's the lights maybe that are doing that. But I do need the DOP input, and I do need the velocity field. Yeah, awesome. So velocity field, and what I'm going to do with that is use this now in a pop sim. So I'm going to put down a file cache and cache this to disk. And let's just call this Pyro Sim. Probably don't need the density. I could blast that away, but I'll keep it there just in case. And we'll set our start frame. So I'll copy the start frame here, copy parameter, paste relative reference on the file cache. So now if I change the start frame of my .NET, my file cache will update. And I'll get rid of the hip name out of the path because that's awful. And hit save to disk. And there we go, it's done. Nice and low resolution. So with horrible display. So there we go. And you can, if you want to visualize those velocities, which is what we're interested in, you can do the same thing that we did before, but this time let's use the max bound. And in the volume trail, actually I'll just reduce that number of points. There we go. In the volume trail, we'll just pick the vel field. And now we can see those velocities. So that is what is going to drive our effects that we're going to do next. So here I'm going to put down a null. And I'm going to say out pyro sim. And then I'm going to create another geometry container. So it's always good to just break your stuff up into as many containers as you have effects, just to keep it nice and ordered and easy to find the various parts that you need. So I'm going to call this one leaf sim. Does not look over the top at all. Well, we'll see. We'll see just how over the top it becomes. So I'm going to bring in the foreground asset because that is what is going to have all of our geometry on it. Hide. Let's see. There we go. So I'm going to have to put down a convert again. I should probably do that back in the foreground asset node so that I don't have to do this in every subsequent node. And then I'm going to scatter geometry on this. So, or scatter points like that. And I could just focus, again, I could just focus on this one to make it simpler. Just focus on that, delete, and then scatter on that. Okay. So let's just, you know, I don't, usually when I'm setting this stuff up, I don't go over the top in terms of my setup first. I just make sure that everything's working at a very simple level, and then I can add complexity to it. One thing I will do though is turn off relax, so that just makes it very even and CG-like. I want it to be a bit more random. So into the pop net, I'm going to source this stuff on the very first frame, so all points. I need to set my start frame to 238. There we go. All points, birth, impulse activation, $F less than 239 will turn this on the first frame, and then on the next frame it will turn off. So just sourcing those for one frame. And then I'm going to put down a pop advect by volumes. And I'm going to bring in those pyrovels. So I'm going to, let's find this. So it's /obj/pyrobreath out pyrosim. And the field name is vel, which is correct. And then we do have a guide in here, so we can turn that on to make sure that it's coming in. And there it is. And let's see what we get. So let's just turn off the guide. The guide is actually quite slow in pops when you have it on, so I always turn that off. And there you go. We can see we're getting some stuff moving around. It's not particularly interesting at the moment, but it is moving at least. So you can see that there. So we could have some other forces in there as well, some gravity. But let's just proceed and try and flesh this out a little more. So what I'm going to do with this is take my result from the pop net and visualizers. Yes, visualizers are very, very important. I always visualize everything, because without it you just kind of don't really know what you're dealing with, you know. You just don't know, and sometimes stuff can not be working and you don't know why, but if you visualize it, it sort of becomes a little bit clearer. So what I'm going to do here, now I'm going to create a little bit of geometry. So just going to create a grid. I'm going to make a leaf, a very simple leaf. Actually, not a grid. I'll draw it in top view. So where's my world here? I'll just put a curve down and draw a very, very simple leaf geometry. And, you know, if you're working at a studio, you might be given this as an asset, but not always. Sometimes you do have to create your own geometry. And I might just then remesh that. Create leaves, copy to points. Yes, you got it. You got it, Robert. The old copy to points. So create a leaf. I'm not gonna do any random instancing at this point, but I will put down a bend just to make this a bit more interesting. So let's go and set my capture. I really hate the bend node. Setting it up, it's just really kind of unintuitive. I never really know which way I'm meant to go. There we go. Capture direction. Can I swap that around? Yeah, here we go. Okay, and change that just to make it slightly more interesting. Yeah, the bend node is very weird. I bet you could kind of make a bend tool that was a bit more intuitive, that actually set up this stuff based on the geometry that you fed in. Like maybe you can do that. I don't know. Maybe pushing some of these buttons makes it happen. But yeah, I just feel like it kind of is super unintuitive. So I'm going to put a transform down now and make this back at origin, and then rotate it, and then just place it like that on the world, because that's how it's going to sit on the ground, like that. So now copy to points. Geometry to copy is our leaf. Here's our points. Oh, beautiful. So I'm going to create a few variation or some randomized attributes here. So at p scale equals fit. Actually, do we have any IDs on here? We do have an ID, so let's do fit 01 rand at ID between 0.01 and 0.2. Let's see what that gives us when we look at our copy to points. So the copy to points will take that automatically. We don't want these to be ginormous either, so you have to keep the scale in mind of your scene. So that is too big. Maybe 0.3, 0.25 maybe, and 0.1. 0.05 is a little small. Alright, there we go. And we can always increase our scatter amount if we want more or less. Leaves, you probably don't want heaps. You might do more kind of dirt and stuff like that. Alright, well let's see what this looks like in the sim. Okay, so they're moving, but it's not particularly interesting. Now, we can also do I'm going to use an attribute randomize for this because it's a little more annoying to write out, but I'm going to do an orient. So randomize the orient, which is going to change the direction that all these leaves are facing. So there we go. And I'm not super concerned that some of them are going through the ground because you can't really tell. You can't really see. Yeah, I think it'll be fine. Alright, so that is going to help, just give them random direction. But you can see they're not really spinning or anything, so we really want them to spin around. And I can do that. I can just put a pop spin in here. You've got pop spin by volumes as well, which you could feed in. So we could try doing that as well. Let's just take that same path and put it in there. And let's see what we get. And it's hard to visualize pop spin until you actually look at the object, but hopefully that will give us some spinning behavior. Let's see. Not yet. So let's try cranking up that value. So we've got update torque, update orientation. Let's just try that. Update orientation. Which one is the program? Oh, we're using Houdini, Andrea. So this stream is all about doing effects in Houdini. I'm gonna try. Let's have a look at this. Yeah, the spin doesn't seem to be working. So the other thing that we can do, I don't use this one very often. We could try just upping the vorticity scale. Let's have a look at that. See if that works. Yeah, it's not really doing anything. Let's use just the regular pop spin. See if we can get this one working. Hopefully they don't all spin. Spin speed, that would help. Come on. Turn that off. Axes 1. Let's just crank all this up. Let's see if we can get something happening. Why are you no spinning? Let's have a look. Your Houdini just crashed. Yeah, I have a spare one open just in case mine crashes. Given that how often Houdini does crash. You kind of just always have to have a spare one on hand. Although 18.5, I have to say, is not too bad. There are certain things that will make it crash, but in the past, Houdini 16 I think was pretty bad for crashing. Let's see, scale spin speed. So this is going to scale it by the angular velocity, so the W value. I'm wondering if the pop advect by volumes is kind of not allowing it to spin. But yeah, it's kind of I don't know why that's not working. It's kind of weird. Delete the points based on velocity so you don't scatter as many leaves. Yeah, but if they... I don't want them to turn on, like... You know, I want them to be there from the start. So if I delete them based on velocity... I mean, unless you mean by ID, so it's only the ones that are moving at all at any point get, like, just remain there. But I think that's fine. I don't mind having, you know, ones that are static be there. That's all kind of, you know, part of it, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I guess you don't want them to kind of just appear out of nowhere. I don't know why this is not spinning. It's very, very annoying. Anyway, I'm not going to linger on that too long. But another thing you can do with spinning is just... You can animate your instance, which is another kind of just interesting way of getting some spinning. It's obviously going to animate all of them, even the static ones. So you kind of don't necessarily want to do that, but it can be a good way just to get a little bit of motion into your object. You could also create a spin post-simulation here using some vex, maybe using your velocity to set like an orient value or something like that. I don't know. I'm not going to waste time worrying about it because it's not the end of the world. It would be nice if they were spinning a little bit, but that's okay. I just really don't know why these aren't working. What if I change the order? Let's see if that helps. Update orientation. Or we could change... Actually, maybe this one works better. Angular velocity. Let's try that. And I'll turn off that attribute randomize for a second. Any spinning? Doesn't look like it. I don't know. It's not wanting to play ball today. I'm probably doing something wrong, but I can't see what I'm doing. Always, if in doubt, my my first reaction is to crank it up to 100 and see if that helps. And it doesn't really seem to. So anyway, doesn't matter. That'll be alright. You can animate the orient value as well, so you can see as I change this value here, that does spin them. So I could, you know, potentially put in some sort of animated parameter in there as well, and that could animate them. Let's just take it down. This is in radians, these orient values, so they're usually super low. You don't want them to be really high. Anyway, that's okay. I'll just leave it. If I figure it out, I'll tell you guys next time. I'm going to create a second popnet here and a second scatter. Retime the sim afterwards to give it an initial puff and then slow it down. Well, I could slow down the popnet as well. So let's, I guess, yeah, what I'm trying to establish first is just the overall behavior, and then we can focus on, improving it. So let's create a dust one as well, which we can have a lot more density to, and we'll do the same thing here. So I'll turn off all that other junk, pop spin, pop back by volumes, and let's see what that looks like. So this will show up hopefully a little bit clearer. Hey, nice. Now, one thing we don't have is the collision object, so we should just take this stuff here, copy. Actually, I'll take all of that, copy back in here, and I'll just paste that in, and then we can bring in that same static object. So, and even further, poaching from my other setups, I'll just take this static object as well. And go leaf sim. Merge. Alright, so there we've got our geometry in there. So now they won't go through the ground, but hopefully they'll just kind of bounce off it and spread along it. Okay, so let's take down our bounce, because we don't want them to bounce on the ground, on the pop object as well. The way bounce works with particles is they kind of multiply against each other, so if you set 0.5 on here and 0.5 on here, they kind of end up being half of that value together. But if you set them both to 0, that should make sure that you don't get any bouncing. And you can see I get some that are sort of sticking to the surface a little more, which is nice. So that's kind of cool. We can also add noise to this, so and a pop force. Oops, pop force. So I could put gravity in and just have them fall down, but as you can probably guess, they're just going to all slide off, even the ones that aren't being affected by the pyro. So that isn't ideal, but that actually helps in sort of calming some of this stuff down. So what I can do though is in the vex expressions, I could just set this to only set this value once the particles sort of start moving. So I could use an if statement to say if length at v, so measuring the speed of the particles essentially, if the length is greater than 0, then I need to set force, so force y. So let's do force dot y, or force y. Force dot y equals, oops, I need to just close my brackets first, equals negative 9.8. Ah, there we go. And I'll set this to 0. So that only once the particles go above a speed of 0 do they get set as negative 9.8. Let's see if that works. There you go. So you can see, good old gravity, that's right. So you can see that before the pyro velocity hits, they don't actually start falling down. But as soon as that pyro velocity starts moving those particles, then they get that gravity, which is cool. It's probably a little strong, to be honest, negative 9.8, even though that is what it should be. I'm just going to make it so it looks good, which is the important thing. Don't care really about the proper values. There we go. So that's kind of cool. Also, you've got air resistance, things like that. These things wouldn't just fall down super quickly. Alright, that's looking pretty nice. Now, our original pyro sim is very low resolution as well, so adding a little bit more res to that will help. And adding some, some shaping settings will also help. So I'll take the division size down and maybe just add a little bit of disturbance in there to just break this up a little bit. So let's have a look at that. You can see, a lot more detail now to it. Hopefully some swirling velocities. We can also turn on confinement, which will just amp up the swirls that are present in the simulation. And again, I'm not overly concerned with what this looks like, but I am concerned with what the velocities look like. So I do want to make sure that they're not too crinkly and too kind of disturbed. You can see the disturbance is kind of everywhere, and that could cause a problem because it is it's everywhere. I only really want it to be where the density is. So I will put in a control field and just set that to density so that it just masks that. So let's have a look at that. That should hopefully now just put the disturbance in the density area. I might just need to change this a little bit. Remap control field, and I'll just bring this up. So here is my 0, so I don't want any density affecting outside the smoke. So you can see when I bring that up, it affects everywhere. So I'll just have that down, but then bring this other flag really close, but not to 0. And then that should affect kind of every part of the density, hopefully, except the really, really, really low area. The other thing that you could do, if that wasn't yielding a good result in terms of your velocity field, is you could turn that off, leave it the way it is, and then you could do some post masking stuff. So let's try that. We'll leave that because it was kind of looking a little better, I think. Maybe not. We'll leave that like that, and then I'll write that to disk again. Hopefully it takes a little bit longer because it's slightly higher resolution, but still pretty low res. Okay, there we go. Let's have a look, see how high res it is, or how low res it is. 1.2 million voxels. So in the scheme of a renderable effect, it's pretty low, but that for velocity should be fine. So we can check our trails again. You can see we've got this crazy noise everywhere. And, you know, if you can't imagine what that will do when we go into our pop sim, let's just have a look. And it's kind of not as bad as I thought. I thought it would kind of disturb everything a lot because there's so much velocity everywhere. Although it doesn't seem to be doing that. So maybe there is some internal masking going on. In any case, I'll show you what I was. Since it's mostly transparent. Yeah, but I'm not. The thing is, I'm not going to be rendering it, so I'm not really concerned about the 1.2 million voxels in terms of like the quality of that density field. I'm not worrying about that at the moment. I'm only I may not even do pyro for the breath. I might do some extra particles or something. I could use the pyro, but I probably would want to go a little higher if I was going to render the density of this of this, because it is a little... Oh, the fire's looking cool now. It is looking a little low res for rendering. Although you're right, because it is not... because it would be transparent, you can kind of get away with lower densities, but there's still a point where it's too low and it will just look kind of blurry, and obviously the density is a little bit kind of crazy. It's like it's super cold and he's breathing out. But yeah, you could have it like really, really low kind of density. And let's see, try and get it to display. And it kind of might be alright. But yeah, not thinking about this for rendering. So what I was thinking of though, if I needed to mask this velocity by just the density field, is you could do that using a volume wrangle, or let's try a volume wrangle. See if we can do it in there. So we could say v at v times equals at density. Actually, it's v at vel. V at vel times equals at density. Let's have a look, see if that works. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. So we've just masked the velocity field based on the density. And you could actually refit the density field to clamp that. So you can see we're, based on this color information, we're actually losing some of the intensity of the velocity field. So you could try refitting this density field so that it kind of, it's like a 0 to 1 mask, or just like a very hard clip mask. So let's do fit density between 0 and 0.1, really clamping those values, and then 0 to 1. Yeah, there we go. So you can see how that has brought back that intensity to the velocity field. So basically what I'm doing is just sampling the very low density areas and then just saying that they're now between 0 and 1. And that gives you a very hard kind of clip. But you can see if I set that to 0 to 1, even that actually is better. It's probably because the max density is more like 10 or something. So it's sort of it's doing this kind of effect where it's between 0 and 10. So it's kind of, yeah, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's hard to visualize those values without opening up the spreadsheet or creating a volume slice. But anyway, that's kind of what I would do, is really crush the density value down like that so that I get a really good, either it's velocity or it's not velocity, wherever there's density. But it doesn't seem like I need to do that. I'll put it in anyway, just in case it's important. And let's go back, have a look at our PopNet. Alright, well I think that's looking pretty cool. We've got a static object in here now, so we need to, on our PopNet object merge, just do star pop star, and that will just bring out the pop object. You can also just put pop object in there as well. That's the thing that we're trying to get by doing that, but we don't want to bring out our static object again. Same deal on here, we want to add the static object in there. But with leaves, a little bit of bounce is good, because it has some kind of tumbling a little more. So let's just merge that in and hit play on that. We could do the same thing with our force, so grab that same one there, paste that in, -2, something like that. You could also, you could go positive as well. You could play around with having the leaves kind of rise up instead, so that they don't kind of fall, they sort of rise up and float around in the air. Or you could set up some other interesting parameters. So again, object merge, star pop star. So, instead of them falling down, then they're sort of, now they're blowing upwards. You could also add a little bit of towards camera direction, because you can see these are just kind of, they're not really being blown back a whole lot. So we could add an extra wind force into here towards positive Z, it looks like. So we could do the same thing in here. We could do force.z equals, I don't know, let's try 2 as well. So they're going to be blown up as well as backwards. There you go. That's a bit nicer. So kind of controlling them a little more. You can play with that even more. The cool thing is that we've got it in this if statement, so they only get blown back once they actually get activated. So it's just kind of almost using the pyro to activate these particles and then adding an extra wind force in there. I think maybe 3. Same thing we can do with noise. So amplitude, let's visualize the noise, know what we're dealing with. So that's our scale. So swirl size. Maybe we don't want it to be super tight. We'll just make it a nice big swirl size. This visualizer as well, like we're pretty close to world 0 and our scale is very small. So the visualizer is nice and close to our geometry. But let's say that you were working all the way over here, which I try to avoid doing because, it makes things difficult, makes positioning things difficult. Things like this aren't over there, so it makes it hard to kind of see. But what you can do is open up the pop force node, and this is just a SOP geometry. So it's a grid with these various point representations of the noise being merged together, and then with an add, joining them together to make a line. So knowing that, you can actually just put a transform or use your center on your grid, but I think it transforms a little bit easier. And you could actually move it to where you needed it. Like that. Go back to my add, jump out of my PopNet. And now my geometry representation is maybe right next to my geometry, instead of going all the way back here and trying to figure that out. So that I find is really useful when I'm working not at the center and I want to see that force, right next to my working space. And you could promote that as well to the top level, that transform, if you wanted to. Even scaling it up and down, so you might be working at a different scale to what this is, so you could scale that up and end up with a much larger noise representation, even increasing, you get the idea. You can do all sorts of things, but you can increase the resolution of this as well, so that you get a nice high-res version of that. Okay, so I've screwed up my SOP guide now. Put it back there. And you can see now that I put all those extra grid divisions in, I can really see what that noise is doing. So I'm going to turn the guide off because it'll be quite slow. And the amplitude, I can do the same thing. So I can copy that, use Vex expressions, and sometimes I'll just put down one of these default ones to see what the parameter is called, or you can hover over it to find out. You can see that it's parameter amp. So I can just say amp equals 1. Oops. And then set my amplitude here to 0. So to play on that. And then we'll get some extra noise coming in there as well. You could crank that up. Hey, Alex, how's it going? Welcome. So you know, I don't know, it's hard to tell if that's working, so that's why I cranked it up, and I can crank it up even more. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, okay, so it is working. It's just a little bit subtle at 10. Maybe the swirl size, you know, is a little bit large, so we can try playing around with that. And again, it's always important to check this through the camera, because you may look at it in perspective and it looks fine, but then it's all about what it looks like through the camera. That's really all we should be caring about there. So that's kind of cool. It's maybe a little bit too noisy, but let's have a look at the leaves. Yeah, okay. That's kind of cool. Let's merge these two together. Merge. Every time in 18.5 now I get a measure instead of a merge when I try to put that down. Our points are quite hard to kind of distinguish here, so I might go to geometry and turn my point size down, and that can sometimes help just, you know, make it a little bit easier to see. Or sometimes I'll copy geometry onto that stuff as well. Alright, so let's have a look. Our dust, like our dirt and dust, I think probably needs to go up a little bit more. So let's go in here and do, maybe we'll do that again. That was kind of working okay for the leaves. And maybe the same thing. It's not the apocalypse. Yeah, well, hopefully things start looking, not that I want to get into politics, but hopefully things start looking better for you guys over there now. That massive change has taken place. I am having a chill Monday. It is very hot here, in fact, in Melbourne today. I'm hoping that I can last the 2 hours for this stream without my aircon on, because it's quite noisy, but it's going to approach 40 degrees today, I think. Celsius, that is. Which isn't too bad, but it gets a bit uncomfortable in here with the computer going. Alright, so maybe... Where's the apocalypse now? Yeah, that's right. It is the sweatbox. My dad lent me this portable air conditioner, which is not doing too bad. It takes the edge off, but yeah, it's definitely warm with the computer going full speed. The apocalypse is everywhere, Robert. Can't escape it. Did look like it was especially going to be happening in America, but hopefully that things calm down a little bit now. All right, so I'm just trying to make this, you know, look. It's not so bad here. Well, that's good. Quiet you with your cheap electronics and your no virus. Just vast, maybe. Yo, how's it going? Welcome. Yeah, okay, so that's not too bad. I don't mind that. We could always play with the popped vec by volumes as well, and you know, we haven't really touched this stuff. What you tend to get when you play with the popped vec is the air resistance, increasing that sort of makes the particles adhere more closely to the velocity volume, you tend to get more of the pyro vels coming through. You can see that that kind of introduced a whole nother level of pyro kind of detail, I think. So I find increasing that is quite good when you want more of that pyro kind of interaction, I guess. And you can, of course, up the velocity stuff. Now, Robert, you were kind of mentioning having a burst and then having it calm down, but I don't know. I mean, let's have a look at the action of Kong. I guess he does kind of stop. Yeah, and that's one thing I hadn't considered, is that he does stop breathing out probably around 286. So maybe I should just turn off my pyrosim as well. So got our epic pyrosim. For all of you newcomers, here is where I turned it into fire. We've got epic fire breathing Kong. But that's not what we're going to do with it. But let's turn it off around, I reckon around I'm going to turn it off around 275, so that has a little bit of time to stop before. So let's try this. I'll just do it in the activation. Oh, actually, what I'll do, I'll animate it down, because that'll be nicer. So what I might do actually is animate it up as well. That would be cool. So let's set it to 0. And then maybe 245, I'll set it up to 5. And then from, well, it's hard to see, 270, set a keyframe down to 280. Whereas it's really hard to see. 280, 285, I'll set it back down to 0. So it's going to kind of ramp up to full steam and then ramp down. Hopefully we'll see that effect in the particles as well, maybe. Let's write that out, see what we get. Well, that happened very quickly, I think, because I have this turned off. Another tip, when you're dealing with pyro, I always forget to mention this when I'm talking to people, but what I do, typically what you do is you save your pyro to disk and then you'll do a flipbook to see what it looks like. But what I like to do, yeah, I could match it to the skirt animation as well, Robert. That's a good idea. What I like to do with pyro and flipbooks is just set your file cache to write files, and then this will automatically write files. If I change frame now just by stepping through, it will write to disk. So what, oh, it's weird, I don't know why it's displaying like fire there now. I just want it to look like smoke. There we go. So what you can do is, with this set to write files, I can do a flipbook and 238, hit start, and then as it's flipbooking, it's actually simulating and writing these files to disk. So then when my flipbook's done, my sim is also done and the files are there. So that's a nice kind of trick to get everything in one. Saves you a lot of time, especially if it's a really slow simulation. That kind of helps. I like to be able to see my simulation as it's running as well, so that I can cancel it potentially if it's awful. So hit load to disk then. Make sure you hit load to disk, otherwise if you make any changes or anything, they'll write to disk. So let's see. Bit of a ramp up and then a ramp down. Let's see what that looks like with our pop network. Leaf sim. See how that matches the dress. It's a good point. Yeah, the dress starts pretty early in terms of the wind, like pretty much as soon as he's opened his mouth. Maybe I'm a little late in mine, but that's okay. It's an easy kind of fix. The other cool thing is that you could time shift this stuff if you didn't have to be super accurate with it. You could just time shift it to start a little earlier. But there we go. That's not too bad. I think the noise probably on my dust is a little crazy, so I'm going to turn that down. Oh, I don't have noise on that. Maybe this one. 10. Velocity scale. Turn that down. So I didn't add noise on this one. I could also add a pop drag, which can help. Just calm things down a little bit as well. Just turn on some air resistance. And there we go. Maybe the the pyrosim is a little bit too detailed now. You can see I'm getting a lot of kind of swirling stuff going on. So we can adjust that just by turning the air resistance down. So hopefully it doesn't follow it quite as closely. I don't know, not too bad. And we can, of course, tailor our scatter to just be in the areas that we want. I've scattered over the whole geometry, which is, just a kind of very quick scattergun approach of just putting it everywhere and seeing what happens. But you could just scatter stuff exactly where you need. Maybe based on a paint, you could paint and then scatter based on that color as density. I think our leaves could do with a few more, so let's crank up our leaf numbers. And perhaps with the leaves we could have a look at that idea of scattering based on color. So put an attribute paint down and a color beforehand, setting it to black. And I'll set this to paint CD, which is color. And then set my left mouse button operation to paint foreground. And then just go in. The paint is dependent on your geometry resolution, but this one seems kind of okay. So we could do that kind of thing. You could just paint on the top surfaces so that you don't have leaves that are kind of sticking out sideways on steps, which would be a little weird. So we could go in and set my my middle mouse operation to paint BG, and then I'm painting black back on here. So just make sure that those are black. It's always good to think about those kind of real world things where you wouldn't really have scattered objects on vertical surfaces like that. You could probably come up with some sort of technical way of doing that based on normals as well, deleting things based on the normal direction if things were pointing upwards. I think that's not too hard to do. So things like that. I find painting is nice and simple and very kind of accurate in terms of exactly where I want something to take place. So rather than just kind of using an attribute like normals to determine it, I just say, well, I just want it here, so that's where it's going to be. And then I'm going to just convert this CDR channel into density. So at density equals at cd.x.r, whatever you want to use there. Scatter based on density. There we go. So now I've just got leaves exactly where I kind of wanted them. And I could, if I have a look at my camera again, yeah, that's probably a little too many leaves, but I could also just paint out a section for the character there. Now I don't have the character, so I can't use them as a holdout, but I might have to try and get them so that I can. You could also try painting BG, but also just paint opacity, take that right down, and then just reduce some of the areas so that you don't get the same amount of density everywhere. You could also run a noise through that potentially to vary it. But this is kind of a nice interactive way of doing it exactly where you want. So, maybe something like that. Doesn't really matter. But we should see now we get less dense areas in those areas where I painted a bit of black in. Now it would be lovely if I could get some spinning on these leaves, but as we saw before, I wasn't able to do that. I don't know why that wasn't working, but I will try and figure it out before next week. Okay, so the dust looks insanely dense in terms of the amount, but it's not going to render like that. It's going to be pretty minimal. let's have a look at what this is going to render out like. So I'll create a null here for my leaves. And another one for my dust or grit. Call that out grit. And then this is my leaf sim node, which I created the grit in as well, which is okay, but I'll just create 2 geometry containers for rendering. So I'll create an object merge and find that stuff. So feel free to ask any questions if you have any about this or anything else that you want, you want to ask. I'm happy to talk about other stuff too. I'm just going to keep going with this until I finish it. But if you have other questions or you want to see something else, then feel free to ask. So grit. So I'll call this render leaves and render grit. And then in this one, object merge. You have a million questions. I know you do, Robert. That's all right. We can talk about whatever, but I guess I'll try and get through this and try and render it out. If you have any questions that pop up with this, say that. If you have any questions along these lines of what I'm doing, then feel free to ask those first. But then maybe, I don't know, we've got about 40 minutes left, so maybe I'll just set this up quickly. But if you have any, feel free to ask, and I'll try and get to them. I don't know why the pyro is displaying here. It shouldn't be. Once again, it's baked into the viewport. So Houdini viewports are just, I don't know, sometimes they really let you down, and it can make you think that you've done something wrong or that something's broken when it's actually just the viewport. Alright, cool. That's looking okay. Not too bad. Let's create a quick material. Hey Sarah, how's it going? No questions, just here to say good day. Well, good day. Thank you for joining me. Have you used Houdini since you finished studying it with me? Leaves material, so I'll put that on render leaves here. Now I'm just using Mantra for all this stuff. One reason is it's easy, but the other reason is I'm working in 18.5 and I don't have Redshift in 18.5 yet. I just haven't gotten around to installing it. Render leaves, so these are polygons, which is okay. I might actually go back here and just, here's what I'll do. I'll put the out leaves here, and I'm going to copy this stuff out, and I'm going to paste it in here. So I'm going to put all my renderable kind of parameters in here. No, well, that's all right. I still hold hope that you'll be back in Houdini one day. All right, so I'm going to put a attribute VOP down, and I'm going to do some random color on these guys. So random into ID, and I just prefer using VOPs for ramps and noises, things like that. It's just a little bit easier to set up and a little bit more kind of visually nice when you're dealing with these things. So oh yeah, please do send me what you're working on, Sarah. I'd love to see it. So I'm just going to set up a random sort of color on these leaves that is going to, not completely random. I want to choose the distribution of these colors. So sort of dry leaf tones, maybe a little green in there as well, but nothing too kind of over the top. Just some subtle kind of variation there. That might be right. Let's have a look at that. Those leaves will inherit it, which is good. And based on the camera and how far away these are from camera, no love and all hate. Yeah, I'm the same. I've actually never really used Maya. I did it. I did some animation in Maya for Wolverine, which, if you remember that movie, there's a scene with the old guy on like this bed of metallic pins that's helping him stay upright, and I animated those pins in Maya, which was painful, to say the least. But I've never done effects or anything really complicated in Maya. Yeah, I don't know. I find it's a weird interface for me when I look at it. It just it makes me feel like I'm back in time using it. Maybe it reminds me of my days in 3D Studio Max. Just seems so old fashioned looking or something. Alright, so we've got our material on there. I'm going to create a normal on my leaf so that renders properly. And then let's just check out our material for the principled shader. Reflectivity, I'm just going to turn that way down, give it some roughness. It's already got roughness, so I'll put that up a little bit. And base coat, I'll just set that to white, and use point color is on, so it will grab those. And then I'm just going to hit save, because I haven't saved in a while. And then go to my out context, and there's my mantra node from last week. So I'll clone that, and I'll call this leaves. And then I'll put in the render leaves node. And we've got our Kong asset as a matte, which we could leave in there, that's fine. I'll probably bring in my foreground asset as a matte as well. So copy that out. Foreground asset, and we've got our lights in here, which we've just got an environment light at the moment. Let's see what happens, see what we get. Render view, leaves. Yeah, look, when I learned Houdini, it was pretty tough. It took me a long time, over many years of kind of plugging away at it to really understand it. And then even, when I was using it in production, I didn't fully understand it. It took a long time for things to really click for me, because it was so different to a lot of those other packages that are out there, like Maya and 3ds Max. It's a lot more technical, but it's a lot more powerful, and I think once you kind of get there with that understanding, then it's really exciting to use it, because there are very few limitations. That's the frustrating thing about other packages like Maya or 3ds Max, is that the limitations that you hit once you're working at a higher level or trying to do more complicated things just become incredibly frustrating. And you spend a lot of time and lose a lot of hair trying to figure out how to make stuff work, and trying all these different workarounds and stuff that that just, at the end of the day, you just wish that it would just work and you didn't have to mess around with I don't know, trying to come up with all these hacks and fixes to make things just work. So yeah, now that I'm at the point where I'm very comfortable in Houdini, I'm very, very kind of happy with it. But I did go through a period where I did not like it. And I opened Houdini 9 when I first wanted to learn it, and I closed it kind of within half an hour when I couldn't figure out how to make a sphere. I don't think they had these shelf tools at that point, and it was just like, I was like, why is it so hard? And I closed it for a few years. Thankfully, it's getting easier every year to get into Houdini. Houdini 9, yeah. It looked very different. I don't know, Houdini 11 maybe, or 12, there might have been I think maybe 11, 10 or 11, there was a UI change. It became a little bit more user-friendly. Did I learn effects in 3ds Max? Yeah. So that was what I used for maybe 10 years. Max was the first thing that I used for everything. Lighting, effects, rendering in V-Ray in 3ds Max. When V-Ray came out, it was awesome. It's amazing. I loved using V-Ray, because you could get realistic renders for not, they weren't incredibly slow, but it was so much better than a lot of stuff that was out there. And RenderMan, was really kind of inaccessible at that time. Alright, so I've just created a p-scale attribute, and I'm going to set up a render for this as well, because the render for the leaves is kind of looking okay. Maybe the colors could be a little better, and the shader, could be worked on a little bit, but that's not too bad. So let's set up the render grid. I could do the same thing with the render grid. I could set up a random color based on the ID again, but I could choose different colors this time. The other thing that you can do with grid, which could be an interesting thing to look at as well, is to take the color from the environment. So if you really want things to blend in to the set that you're putting this dust on, for example, you can use the colors from the environment. So we'll go back to our foreground asset. I think I've got this UV quick shade here. So I've got that, which is projecting the set on. So I'll take that path. So it's got a UV texture, which is projection from the camera, which is great. Although it is animated. So I don't know why this is starting to chug a little bit, but let's go back. It's really slowing down for some reason. Turn off materials, go back to our leaves, leaf sim, and then here what I'm going to do is freeze my geometry, because you can see that this is time dependent, because it has, even though it's a static geo, it has animated UVs which are based on the projection camera. So I'm going to freeze it at a certain frame. Let's freeze it. Let's pick a frame to freeze it on. Set view, camera. So even 238 is probably fine. That's the frame that we're starting on. So we'll freeze it, and now the UVs will just be frozen in that state. They won't update anymore. And I can do. Let's have a look at our scatter. Do our scatter points get those UVs as well? They do. There we go. So I could do attribute from map. Paste in that file path, but instead of the entire sequence, which this $F4 is going to give me, I'm going to choose frame 238. I could have just typed that in, but didn't want to mess up the numbers. 238. There we go. So this is going to give me color from the map. And it's a little hard to see. 3ds Max is good for VFX in films. Well, look, it was, and you can still do stuff. I mean, people do still use 3ds Max, but it is not the best. You do hit a lot of limitations. It is certainly not the industry standard anymore, or I don't know if it ever was, but yeah, quite a lot of studios used to use it for certain things, but now it really isn't, the kind of main software that people use. If you wanted to get a job in VFX, then it's not the one to learn, because you will not find a studio, or you will find very few studios that will be using it. So it will be incredibly difficult to get a job. Even the studios that are using it are trying to, move away from it. I think the dangerous thing with 3ds Max is that Autodesk will want to ditch it. They don't care about it anymore. Film is not a big part of their sort of revenue, because nobody uses it anymore. The only people that do really use 3ds Max are the engineering and architecture, visualization kind of fields. So they're sort of, they're not really interested in sort of keeping that for the film industry. Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with 3ds Max. I used to love it. I really, did enjoy creating things in it. But then the more I worked in film, the more I realized that it was, it created so many problems that, it just made for a very painful experience. To the point where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's so hard to get what I want out of the software. But then Houdini came along, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But eventually I got past that, and it's really enjoyable to create stuff now. Hey, Rizwan. Lightwave, yeah, that's right. Look, I mean, like I said last time, I don't know much about Lightwave, but I'm sure you can create some interesting things in there. Alright, so you can see what I did there. I added the color from the attribute from map. So time shifted to freeze the UVs. Did my scatter, then after the scatter, because the scatter has UVs, I can do the attribute from map. There's the UV attribute, and it's outputting CD on there. So now my particles kind of blend into my environment, which is kind of cool. And they take that color with them when they transform. You could manipulate that a little bit. You could have it sort of not be exactly the same. You could have it be a tone lighter or something, a shade lighter, just so it's a slight difference. But yeah, I think that's a nice way to get stuff to blend in to your environment a little more, so that it doesn't really stand out immediately. And then as it sort of flies around in the air, then you can kind of see it. It also adds a nice variation. So let's have a look. What was I doing? So here's my variation. I can ditch that, the color, but I do need some variation on P scale. So I'm going to leave that there and then have a look at my render view, set up another mantra node. So out leaves, call this one grit. Just stop that for a second. And then this one can be render grit. You'll also notice, I don't know if you guys know this, but when you're typing objects in here, you can see this says this is red. And that means that it doesn't exist, this node. It hasn't found a match. So, if I do, you can see when I hit render grit and that does exist, it goes orange. That means it has found a match. But, if I got that wrong, for example, I'm using Houdini, Rizwan. So yeah, you can see when I get that right, it goes orange. So that's a nice way to know if you've got it right or wrong when you're typing it. You can, of course, always pick, but sometimes that can be a little tricky when you've got a lot of stuff. Alright, so grit, camera, render. Now we'll see what our P-scale values that I put in here will look like. Maybe a little large, maybe a little small. They're a little large. Golf balls everywhere. Who makes it? Side Effects is the company that makes Houdini. So it's Side Effects software. I think the website is just sideeffects.com. Check it out. You can get a free copy of Houdini. You can get the apprentice version that you can use. And it's pretty full-featured. You can't use third-party renderers, which isn't necessarily an issue when you're learning. But it is completely full-featured. You just get a watermark over your renders, which is fine when you're just learning. Okay, so it doesn't look like the colors coming through. I don't know if I applied a shader to this. Let's see. I did not. Let's put the same leaves shader on, because that is taking the point color as well, and that's probably fine. There we go. So there's our point color. Let's on here we can add a background in here. Oh, it looks like we do have one. For some reason that's not coming through. Oh, maybe I've got it turned off. We can go to the view display options over here. There it is. Look at that. Okay, so you can see the grit. Yeah, it's pretty minimal, but it will add a certain something. Might just create a separate shader for that so I can tweak those settings. Hey, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Rainiel? I probably got that horribly wrong. I'm sorry about that. Hey, how you going? Welcome. Greetings from Australia. So I'm going to put a grit shaded here, and I'm going to make these slightly more reflective so that I just want them to pick up a little bit more light. I also don't have a moon light in my scene. So I only have a HDR, and probably not a very good one at that. I think I just grabbed one of the default ones in a hurry last time. So that one isn't a great one to use, but let's create a spot. So turn on my King Kong. So it's coming from behind his head, kind of like that. And I'll just create a spotlight in there. Render view. Yeah, the render is great. The render, incidentally, as we were talking about Maya and 3ds Max, etc., the render is done in Maya of the environment and the King Kong. So I am just going to be adding the effects, and so I'll be rendering all the effects in Houdini. But the render is great; it's beautiful. But this was done in Maya, I think, with Arnold. I believe that's right. And yeah, it looks really nice. So, Robert, we were talking about this earlier in terms of you know, moonlight. So I think when you're dealing with moonlight, I mean, you can see here very blue tones in the moon texture that we've got up here, but I think having some sort of blueness to your light, create a cool kind of color. We've got some warmth in this scene, and it's coming from the firelights that have been put in here to light the environment. But overall, if you look at everywhere else where that firelight isn't touching, the tones are very cool. So you want to kind of, when you're doing a moonlighting scenario, you do want to keep that stuff quite cool. I just realized as well that we probably should create some firelights in here to have accurate kind of illumination that matches the set. So let's go and do that as well. For those, I'll just use spotlights. So I'll turn on my foreground asset, and I'll just point lights. I think I said spotlights. Oops, not portal. It's just called light when you're typing it out. So I'm just going to create point lights. And place them sort of there. That'll kind of be alright. For testing these lights out though, it's not a great idea for me to test it just rendering the grid. Do I recommend learning Maya first as a beginner? Well, not. It depends what you're interested in, Hector. I think if you're interested in a career in visual effects or being an effects artist, then I don't really think it is necessary to learn Maya, because you just won't be using it. So it does depend what you want to do. I think, Houdini is a great package for kind of doing everything, but it's not the best modeler out there. It's not the best character animation tool, although they are, trying to kind of work on that. But yeah, I don't think you have to learn, another package first before you get into Houdini. You just, in fact, in some ways, learning something else first makes it harder, because you're always comparing Houdini to that other thing that you learned, and it is not the same, and it's way more technical. So in some respects, I think learning Houdini first is probably, going to end up being better, because you won't have anything to compare it to, and you'll just think all of 3D is really hard. I joke, but yeah, I think, if it depends what you're interested in. What are you kind of interested in, Hector? Tell me, and I'll see if I can help you determine what would be the best thing to learn. All right, so I could fiddle with those lights all day, but there we go, something like that. So to test those though, I'm going to create another mantra node and just render the set. So I'll put the Kong asset in, maybe like that. Render view. Set. So foreground asset. I might just turn off my... Oh yeah, okay. I'll just turn that off on Kong as well. I'll just bypass. Oh, I already have. Great. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's right, Robert. I agree. Definitely my knowledge of 3ds Max did not help me in learning Houdini one bit. Although, my knowledge of creating effects was still useful, although I had to learn different ways of creating them. Having knowledge of another software is not going to help you at all. So I'm going to just put a principled shader down on these, because without principled shader they don't really respond terribly well to light. You can see it's just really bright. So I'll just turn reflection off on that as well, and maybe just darken it down a touch. What I'm interested in here is these firelights. So I'm going to change them together at the same time. So you can select two lights at the same time and change their settings together, and they will both update. So you can see as I increase the exposure. Do you mean the P-flow system in 3ds Max, Robert? Or thinking particles, TP? Alright, so there's my my fire light. Looks like my Kong isn't really rendering. Oh, he's got a constant shader on him, so he is there, but he has this constant material on him, which is making him not respond to light. Well, that's okay. Now, I can see my lights, that's great, but one thing that a lot of people don't do when they're setting up their lights is turn on attenuation or mess with the attenuation. Maybe because they don't understand it, but we're getting light like thrown with these point lights, especially. They just throw light really far. But my firelights really should only be kind of constrained to this area here. So I always control my attenuation for specific lights by setting the ramp end distance so that it falls off at a point that I want it. I can control it, and now I no longer get light all the way out here from those. You can change the ramp as well. This is kind of going to be like how it falls off over the distance. So you can see that's a bit more gradual now. It was really bright and then fell off right at the end before, like this. So you can see it's super bright and then there's the fall off. But if you have it sort of like that, a bit more linear, then it falls off over the whole distance. So you can play with that now to make it less or more. So I can have a look at that. Well, there we go. I mean, that's quite nice where it hits that a little bit. But I think probably we're not lighting the environment as well, but I just use this to test. And then we can go back and have a look at our leaves, for example. Hit render and see how those lights illuminate those leaves. Look, so Hector says, I want to make VFX short films. I think, yeah, look, I think you could use Houdini for all of that, but I think it's good to have number of different softwares kind of in your repertoire, depending on, you know, what you might need, then you can choose the best kind of tool. For instance, a lot of people use Modo for modeling, Lightwave, Maya, 3ds Max, whichever tool kind of handles the job best, I guess, is my kind of guide for picking which software. But I like just being able to use one software because it's a lot less kind of a headache. Switching between software is really annoying. Transferring things between Maya and Houdini, usually Maya to Houdini is fine, but then back from Houdini to Maya can be really problematic. That is one of the greatest headaches that we experience working in a studio, is trying to get stuff out of effects to lighting or to somewhere else. You can spend hours trying to sort something out. Something doesn't work. Maya is very fussy about the geometry that it can handle, whereas Houdini can just kind of take anything and it doesn't really care, and you can fix it if you need to. But Maya just basically crashes if you feed it the wrong type of geometry. So yes, I do. Yeah, that's right. So I think it's best to avoid that. If you're working by yourself, it's much easier if you just work in one package, whether it's 3ds Max, Houdini, or whatever. Houdini has a compositing component to it as well, so if you're thinking about, you know, putting shots together, compositing, you can use that. It's not the best compositor in the world, but it's not too bad. Yeah, well, scales between Houdini and Maya are different, so their unit scales are different. In Houdini, they're meters. In Maya, centimeters or millimeters. I can't remember which one, but so everything's always 10 times too big or too small. As long as you're aware of that isn't so much of an issue, but there are lots of problems. Yeah. So here we go. This isn't looking too bad. These leaves down here maybe are a little bright for my liking in terms of this lighting that's going on in the scene. But now we're getting these firelights in here, which is kind of cool. And that will pass through to everything, you know, when we get the draw back in there for rendering. We can turn that on and see. Quite often what I'll do as well is have just an all test render, where I don't render everything all together for final, but when I want to test stuff out, I'll just put everything kind of that I want in there. So I'll put those two in the matte slot, and then I'll put grit leaves and drool. Maybe not the flip drool. I think that's probably not going to work. Hit render. Hey, no worries, Hector. Anytime. Yeah, I think, you know, it does depend what you want to do, but if you are interested in doing a lot of effects or some really complicated kind of stuff, then Houdini is definitely, you know, a great tool for that. So the render grid isn't showing up. Let's just check that, make sure that it's there. It is there. It's all sitting on the ground, probably. That's why. Let's have a look. No render grid. Sometimes with the interactive renderer. Oh wait, silly me, I'm rendering the leaves. I was going to say sometimes with the interactive renderer things don't update properly, so it's a good idea to hit stop and then render again. But I'm an idiot. I just had that set to leaves instead of all. Good call, Robert. I agree. All right, there we go. I think the grit probably is a little large, but let's just take that max down a little bit and see if that helps. There we go. We want the grit to be just kind of perceived thing. You don't want it to be super over the top. You just want it to catch a few glints here and there. I'm only rendering at 1280 at the moment as well. I should probably put that up to HD and see what it looks like at HD, because that will show it up a little nicer. It's also kind of hard to tell with the background there, but yeah, the grit is kind of just this thing that's going to make the ground, you know, or the effect just pop a little bit, add a little bit more texture to the air. So yeah, I think this will be alright. I think the leaves, you know, we could potentially bring those down, and that is something that I could do in comp as well. I'm not overly concerned about that. There are some really black ones in here that I may want to just try and work out what is going on there. It could just be that those are the back sides of those leaves, so you might just want to check. Shade both sides as front. That's sometimes what you need to do for that. Actually, it might. I don't know if, no, it's not shadows. It could also be that those leaves are getting a shadow from the set. So we could try taking that out and see if that change. Yeah, there we go. So see there, that is actually the shadow from the foreground asset, I think, or the Kong geometry. Let's take Kong out. Stop. Render. Oh. What is that? I think the draw must be set to, yeah, there we go. Okay. So let's go back down here for the draw. I think that wasn't showing up before because I had Kong in the holdout, but yeah, that's just the mouth getting that drool material on there. Yeah, that's right, Patrick. The more time you spend with it, the more you start to, enjoy it, and the less of a headache it is. I think there is just a large period of time that you have to spend with it, figuring out all those things that just take time to kind of work out, and it's just practice as well. You need to practice creating these things and trying out all different techniques. So yeah, I think we're getting a shadow from the foreground. I'm not sure why it's so black like that, but it could be because the environment light is casting shadows upwards potentially. I don't know. It's not the end of the world. I think we should just render this stuff out, which is maybe what I'll do over the break between now and next week, and then we can have a look at this stuff in comp and start to kind of determine what else we might need. Obviously, we're going to need to do fire, so we might work on that next week. We'll get some fire in there, some just small little pyro torches. And we can also look at getting a little bit of that breath in there. Might be cool. It might help sell, that it's cold environment or something, just a little bit of pyro breath. Might need to tweak our simulation a bit so it's not so noisy. And also probably what we could do is create a dust simulation as well for here. I think that would be cool. That'll just help tie everything together, because the grit and the leaves are really just the big parts, and then for any really, really tiny dirt and dust, we want that to show up as pyro. So having the grit in there really helps that. It just helps it look a bit more detailed, a bit more textured. But we'll have to do that next week. We'll focus on doing pyro next week. So we've got our drool, we've got our flip drool as well, which I think is just a bit too ridiculous. Let's have a look at that particle fluid surface. I don't think we have that in there. Let's put that in. Overall, that just needs to be calmed down quite a bit, I think. Is just a little bit too over the top. A bit blobby. Probably just even some really fine particles coming out of his mouth would be nice as well. The firelight on those is a little bit intense as well. Let's turn those off for a second. So you can see the firelight is really illuminating that stuff in there. So probably what I would do for that is, obviously, like I said, I don't render everything all at once or all together when I'm doing my final renders, but probably what I would do is just create a separate, if I want those firelights to light up the drool, just create a separate set of lights for the drool. Drool, firelight, and just have them set up differently. So maybe they have different attenuation values, or maybe they just have, so I'll turn those ones off. Maybe they just have slightly less exposure values, so that they're still illuminating a little bit, but not super intense. And then when I want to render the drool, I just have my drool set up, and then in candidate lights I can just do drool star, and that will grab any lights that have in their name. So I can set up a whole set of lights that just do that effect. More spit, make it rain. Yeah. I think when I first did it, it was completely covering the girl when I first ran the sim, which was a bit gross. But yeah, I think definitely we could have some more coming out of there. There is a part in this simulation, I think, where it's a little more intense. Let's have a look at this. He's hungry. Yeah, so alright, well, there we go. We've got a plan for next week, and I'm pretty happy with the leaves. There's a few little bits and pieces that I want to try and sort out, like the black. shadows coming from that stuff. The leaf model look is not the best thing in the world as well, so we could spend a bit of time trying to make that a bit more interesting. Yeah, that's kind of cool though. I mean, this is probably a bit too blobby, but there's some really nice things happening here, and the vellum stuff that we did last week is actually looking pretty cool. So it may just be a case of taking our droplet scale down on the flip and just making that a much smaller kind of mesh, so that it's not super goopy and blobby. I mean, see, that already looks loads better. Influence scale we could take down a little bit. That'll just drop the blending. Actually, I think it looked better before. Could add some smoothing as well. You know, so you can obviously make it hit the girl. Gross. Just cover her. I can't, because I don't have her. I could try and get her, but I don't have her or the pole, unfortunately. So I'm just gonna have to make it work. That would be pretty funny. Maybe we can do that for the bloopers reel. Yeah, so I think this is going to come together. I think things that I still want to do are dust on coming off the ground. Maybe a little bit more on the breath work for Kong. Fire for the torches. And then I thought it would be nice as well to get a little bit of mist in, sort of low-lying mist hanging around these rocks. I can't do too much around Kong because I don't have the hair and I can't use that as a holdout. So that would be difficult to integrate. But I can do it sort of around the set, and I could have some mist kind of in front of Kong here, and I could potentially do it behind him as well, and then in comp I could put those two things together if I could get a render of just Kong by himself. Then I could put some behind him as well, so I could do some in front and behind, and then just in comp make it look like they're surrounding him. But I thought that might be nice. Even some clouds might be nice. I don't know if we'll have time to do that, but yeah, got a little plan of what we still have to do. So hopefully in these 2-hour sessions we can achieve all that and make it a really cool looking shot, which is already. But effects just gives it that little extra special something, special sauce. All right, guys. Well, we're pretty much out of time. But thank you for joining me. I hope it's been informative, and hope you enjoyed watching me bring this effect shot to life. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Those of you that are in CG Spectrum, feel free to message me on Slack, or if you have any suggestions for future streams or questions that you want me to answer next time, then feel free to ask me. Anyone else that isn't part of CG Spectrum that might be joining us, feel free to email me or contact me through the school. Red Hot Chili Peppers next on this channel. Music is something that I would like to sort out, so it's not just me. That might be nice. Yes, please like and subscribe. That would be great. I'm going to be doing lots of cool stuff over these streams. Once we finish this, we can work on other things. So if anyone has any requests for cool stuff to work on, then please let me know. Because I haven't really got anything beyond this Kong shot planned yet. But I will be trying to come up with some awesome things to work on. So yeah, thank you for joining me, guys. Nice to see you all again. Okay. Yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Have a good week, everybody. Stay safe. I hope it's not too cold in the Northern Hemisphere. Send some of my hot air to you. See you, Robert. That's right. See you guys. Bye.